Welcome to Hey Sister. This is season 2, episode 2, emotional self-check.
Hey sister.
Hey sister.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Courtney Lewis.
And I'm Carly Ferguson. Welcome to our Sisterly Phone Call Inspired podcast.
Hop on our calls each week as we interview qualified guest experts and discuss the meaningful and sometimes mundane aspects of our lives.
We're so excited to connect with you, sister. Let's get talking. Hello and welcome to another episode in our newest season of Hey Sister. I'm Carly and I'm so glad to be with y'all again. Thank you for being patient with me and Courtney as we took a short break after season 1 to prepare for season 2 and also enjoy a little extra time with our families over the holidays. You can listen to our last week's episode to learn more about the areas of emphasis we're excited to dive into this season, as well as our reflections from season 1. But now we're back and we're ready to hit the ground running. Courtney, tell our sisters all about the area of focus for this month's episodes and the incredible guest expert we have in store for them.
I would love to. Over the course of this season, Carly and I are excited to talk about building and strengthening connections within our communities. That said, sometimes before we can even think about making friends or sharing our joys, decisions, and struggles with someone else, we need to really consider our own emotional readiness to make connections, how to set boundaries when needed, and also how to dig deep and step outside of our comfort zones so that we can truly create and build a network of beautiful, meaningful, and lasting relationships in our lives. This is where today's expert comes in. But before I introduce her, I want to pose a question. Have you ever known someone who is truly gifted at listening and validating your concerns without overstepping their bounds? It's a real gift, isn't it? Being a friend with someone like that and being that friend to someone else is a special thing. Sometimes I wonder if that special art is lost. And that's why we're seeing so many therapists and life coaches becoming licensed and certified in this chaotic world where it seems like no one has the time to slow down and genuinely listen to another person. Well, today I have the privilege of introducing a guest expert who I believe can help all of us to be that kind of friend and be prepared to attract the kinds of friends who make the most meaningful connections in our lives. Tamara Lichfield is a friend of mine and a certified life coach, which means she is literally the ideal person to talk to when you feel like no one is listening and you want to know if you're crazy or not. And side note, one of the main reasons I love talking to Tamara is that not only does she listen and validate concerns, she also has so much knowledge in her field of study to provide research and terminology as support. She's also bold and encouraging. And we're kindred spirits because she plays the flute, as do I. So I love to use her as a resource if ever I need to do a musical number in church. We are excited to host Tamara in a 3-part series this month, where she will coach us through 1, assessing our emotional readiness for connection, 2, discussing setting boundaries, and 3, helping us launch ourselves outside of our comfort zones to make connections. All that said, Tamara, welcome to Hey Sister.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Courtney and Carly.
So Tamara, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I am born and raised in California. I currently live in El Dorado Hills, California. We have lived in this area for about 19 and a half years. I have 3 children. My oldest daughter is 18. My son is 16. And we have a 6-year-old daughter also. Like Courtney said, I am a musician. I have a degree in flute performance. And I'm also, like she said, a life coach with Becoming Shatterproof LLC. And I specialize in guiding my clients through emotional trauma and teaching my clients healthy emotional skills to navigate relationships of all kinds. I have certifications as a certified trauma support specialist, and I am a certified partner coach candidate. I'm also working to become a certified resiliency professional.
That's exciting. Very needed.
We're excited to have you on with us today. I'm wondering, can you tell us, Tamara, what does an emotional check-in or emotional self-check mean to you as a life coach?
For me, it means for me to get in touch with my feelings and to figure out where I am emotionally. Also, it's important to know as we're thinking about our feelings, where we're feeling it in our body. That can help us know what we need to do to help to get regulated. So yes, the first step is to get in touch with your emotions. Often as women, we don't have a culture where we have how to express our emotions modeled in healthy ways. I feel like somewhere along the lines, we have been conditioned to believe that anger is actually sinful and that it should not be ever felt or expressed. And this is not true. My belief is that idea actually stifles connection and vulnerability. We have examples in scripture of Jesus Christ expressing emotion and doing that in healthy ways because he's perfect and always has been. So the shortest scripture in the Bible is Jesus wept. And here he models that it is healthy to express sadness. We also see him upturning the money changers' tables outside the temple in Jerusalem. And there he's expressing anger. And he's doing that in a healthy way. Suppressing our emotions can lead to very unhealthy coping mechanisms that can actually destroy relationships and healthy connection. So here's a quick little primer on how to express emotion. So joy, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. We celebrate, we dance, even saying thank you is a way of expressing joy. There are so many ways. I think that one, people can figure that one out. And sadness is also one of those emotions that people may not feel comfortable expressing. And in some ways, we can feel that sadness. And even this might sound odd, but you can almost schedule a time with yourself to express that. So you contain it for the moment. And then what you can do is you can find a way to express that. For me, what works really, really well is running a hot bath, getting a playlist of songs of various types, and then just letting myself feel. And it works like no problem, especially if I felt that sadness and I know I need to express it. I can emote freely without judging myself. That's another important thing about emotions, is that we don't need to judge them. I have heard it said that judging emotions as either positive or negative isn't really helpful. Emotions just are. And so we can be healthier, I think, if we don't judge them. We just let ourselves emote and let ourselves feel. And that is a healthy way to go about things.
I like that you brought up the reference to Jesus Christ overturning the tables, the money changers at the temple, because I feel like I actually don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And as a mom, there are times where I just want to turn up a table. Like I'm so frustrated, particularly the Lego room table. I feel like that just the chaos that ensues in that room. I step on a Lego and that's where I want to turn that table upside down. So I appreciate that you shared that example, because it is okay to acknowledge that we have these emotions and feel them. So I love where this is going. What else do you have for us?
Well, along those lines of anger, I was going to suggest ways that we can express anger. Expressing anger usually is going to involve some sort of physicality. In order to get that out of your system, literally out of your system, it can get stuck there in the body and you want to get it out. You can punch a pillow, exercising, sometimes like running, something that's aerobic exercise is going to help. Even slapping a pool noodle against the wall. Make sure there's no pictures on the wall because it's going to break those. You want to avoid any damage. Other things that you can do is if you have a punching bag, I don't, but some people do. You have a punching bag and you can punch a punching bag, and that helps with expressing the anger. Another way to express emotions or to even get in touch with the emotions is to sit down with a journal, and it can be even a burn journal. And I'll explain a burn journal in just a second. And so what you can do is you just sit down with those papers and you literally just write how you are feeling. And again, non-judgmentally, don't judge yourself. Just go ahead and write it down. And it can be messy, literally messy. It can be messy handwriting. It can be just all your thoughts without any order. We're not writing a thesis paper. We're not writing an essay. It doesn't have to have a thesis statement. You just write. And that can be so cathartic and a very, very healthy way of doing things. And then if you don't want to keep that, another healthy thing to do is burning it. You can find a safe place to do your little fire. You can burn that. If you don't have a fire, or you can't light a fire, just ripping it up into zillions of pieces of paper is also very beneficial, because with that you are involving something tactile, and also you're moving, so you got some kinesthetic things going on, and so that is super helpful for identifying those emotions and then letting them go, like literally just letting them go. And there's a quote that a life coach, his name is Rich Weiler, he said something to the effect of this: essentially, any emotion fully felt eventually leads to another emotion, which eventually leads to peace. And I have found that to be very true. I have found that when I'm feeling a strong emotion, it's okay to say strong. We're just not going to label positive or negative. But when feeling a very strong emotion, then I will cycle through. A lot of times you'll go from angry to sad, or the reverse too. You can go from sad to anger. And then eventually you land on peace after you fully felt the emotion without suppressing any of that.
That's wonderful. I really like that. It also helps you feel like there is an end in sight, remembering that it will draw back to peace if you allow those feelings to be felt. There's this hope that we're going to reach a finish line at some point. This isn't just a forever long marathon. It's
I'm going to be angry forever.
Right. Like sometimes,
Yes.
I mean, for children, I've heard that for little ones, they developmentally and mentally, they're not able to understand that their emotion is going to end. So like a toddler will think that their sadness that they don't have the ball is just, it is all consuming, because they don't see how it could be anything but that. And it takes like 70 seconds or something for them to kind of reset.
Yes. What we're feeling now, it's not permanent. And to have that frame of mind that even though you're feeling super angry or super sad, it's not forever.
So as emotional people, right, everyone has emotions. How do we create these healthy connections? What do those look like? And then how do we know that we're ready for it personally?
Healthy connection happens in a relationship when it's mutually beneficial. So if it's a symbiotic relationship, that means it's mutually beneficial. And healthy connection is you as your authentic self. So you're showing up as you really are. You don't have to put on a face. You are you. When I like to say, it's someone who's going to still be my friend and be authentic and vulnerable with me if I don't have my makeup on, if I'm in my pajamas, if I'm sick, however it is, that's going to be a healthy relationship. And that the other person, they're going to be as vulnerable and authentic with you at the same time. And I think our relationships, they can ebb and flow. Sometimes you can notice some people can be getting into an unhealthy territory. And then we'll talk about this later, but that's where boundaries come into play.
Yeah, we'll talk about boundaries next week. But for right now, I want to talk about this. You're saying show up authentically. And I feel like that's a word. There's a few words that I feel like are buzzwords ever since 2020. The pandemic caused all these words of like boundaries and authentic self and gaslighting, all these words that I feel like are all over the place in the podcast world. But speaking of being authentic, I feel like sometimes you use this word authentic to almost justify a behavior of, well, that's just who I am. So I know I've heard you talk before, Tamara, about even though you're being authentic, that there are still kinds of communication that we should avoid for healthy connection. So could you talk about those areas of communication to avoid so that we can be authentic without using these areas as crutches to say, well, that's just who I am?
Yes, absolutely. And I completely agree to your point that sometimes it's used as an excuse. Well, authentically, I'm just this, and so I can do whatever. That's not healthy at all. So those 4 kinds of communications to avoid, I'll just go over what they are and then I'll explain them. So there's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So criticism is either it's an intentional or unintentional attack on someone. So we want to avoid that if we want to have some true connection. And criticism is also often used as a blaming or shifting the blame device. If someone doesn't want to take responsibility for something, then they'll tend to criticize. Usually, if someone is very critical, there's usually something else going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And so they become critical of other people because honestly, they're critical of themselves too. And a lot of it has to do with shame. So what the antidote for that is, for me, if I find myself being critical, I'm going to switch you statements with I statements, with I feel statements, with I feel happy when you do whatever it is, or I feel frustrated when you don't pick up after yourself. I'm thinking about like my children. Some people may say that would work for their spouse too, but I'm not bagging on anybody.
I'll say that with my spouse. I'll throw him under the bus. He knows this is common for me. No, I think that's very common with being critical of others. That's a very common response when you feel like their lack of doing something is making more work for you, or maybe you feel like they're getting the limelight for something that you don't feel is deserved. And so you're going to be critical of their behavior. And I think also in terms of, you're saying replacing the you statements, I think you could also replace it with the she statements or he statements, because a lot of times those critical thoughts are almost in like a gossipy way. Well, she is this or he is that. And so those inside thoughts, they should stay inside thoughts and not come out of your mouth as gossip, because then that's when you're going to be critical of someone else.
Yeah, the self-talk is important. It's important to have self-talk that's positive for yourself as well as for others. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely critical. And with all of these, actually, it gives us a chance to have some introspection. If we can find that place between impulse and response, and then change our behavior before it becomes one of these unhealthy connection pieces. So the next one was defensiveness. And a lot of times when we're attacked verbally, then what do we want to do? Our first reaction, which isn't necessarily a response, but our first reaction is to want to be defensive back. But an antidote for becoming defensive is to first take responsibility for your part that you may have played in the situation. And if you haven't played a part in it, for that dynamic, then for that one, the antidote is to remove yourself from the situation, revisit it later when the attacker has self-regulated and is in a healthy emotional space to interact. So self-regulation means basically if we're in a heated situation, there's some stuff going on in our brain. Okay. We want to get out of our primitive brain and then back into the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning brain. So there are self-regulation activities that you can do to get yourself back there. That's a whole other podcast episode. So basically, you want to wait till someone's back into their executive functioning brain where they can actually make logical decisions before you come back to that conversation.
It's interesting, as you're talking about defensiveness, I want to raise my hand and be like, that's me. When I get to the point that I'm not feeling like a healthy connection with somebody, my immediate go-to is defensiveness. And I can say really cutting things. I have a very sharp tongue, and I'll often think back and what was that you just said about finding that balance between impulse?
Oh, there's a space between impulse and response.
That's
so
it.
You have a choice of what you're going to do.
And sometimes I choose the right and I bite my tongue, and other times I let my tongue go. And oftentimes I let my tongue go when I haven't pre-planned how I'll react and how I'll respond, or it's late at night and it's with my husband and I'm trying to wrap up a conversation because it's gotten too late. And I'm like, what's the fastest, sharpest thing I can say to end this conversation right now? And it's not a healthy thing to do. So I'm glad you brought the defensiveness up. What was the third area to avoid?
The third area to avoid is contempt. Now, contempt with a person is speaking from a position of superiority and sometimes authority, and it's condescending. I'm trying to think of an example of something that's condescending. I can think of, well, at least I have done whatever it is. And since you haven't, then obviously you're not as good as me. And I don't know an exact way to say that, but it's one of those things where you are putting yourself above someone else. And so the antidote to that is to try and cultivate respect and appreciation. And the goal is to create a relationship where there's an environment where everyone is respected for their contributions and appreciated. And appreciation is then regularly expressed, words of praise, things like that. And if you're the one who is contemptuous and using that, it's one of those things where it's an opportunity here to change your mindset and to look for the positive, look for things that you appreciate, and then express them to that person. That's going to build connection.
Right. I actually think of, as you're saying that, they say one of the downfalls of social media is that you're comparing your lows to somebody else's highs, because you're on social media and you might be experiencing a very boring or mundane day, and then you see somebody else is on vacation. I almost feel like contempt is the opposite of that, where you're putting your highs to somebody else's low. You're seeing somebody react to a situation that you might not fully understand, but you might be thinking, I would have handled this so much differently because I'm in a much healthier space, or I'm much more educated, or I'm much more physically fit, or whatever, however you are judging somebody else's behavior. And so you're seeing them with contempt. You can't believe how lazy they are, or how uneducated, or whatever the topic may be. You're comparing your highs to their lows.
Good point. I love that. Thank you, Courtney, for adding that. The fourth one is stonewalling. If you're stonewalling someone, it's basically when you become flooded with emotion and you're overwhelmed. Your brain and your emotions are just overwhelmed and they're just firing all over the place. And your response then is to check out. And it can literally mean walking out of the conversation, detaching from it completely, without telling the person that you're talking with when you're coming back to revisit it. And then what that does is it leaves the other person just completely confused. That person may not understand that you're flooded, especially if you haven't expressed that you're flooded and overwhelmed. It's confusing when you're talking with someone and then they just literally walk out, and then they can feel even ignored and disrespected because they're not there anymore. So the antidote to that is to, we talked about this a little bit with the other ones, is to self-regulate, to do something where you are going to get yourself back into a healthy emotional state. So what you need to do there is to take a break from the conversation. And the important thing is with communication is to actually express things. So express the need that you need a break. And then you say, I'll come up with the time and tell them I'll be available at such and such a time. And then that allows both parties in the conversation to actually get out of their amygdala, which is their primitive survival brain, and then back into their prefrontal cortex, their executive brain, where they can make logical choices, have a healthy conversation.
Is that primitive brain? Is that the same thing I've heard you refer to before as also like the reptilian brain?
Yes.
Okay. I always thought that was such a funny phrase. So to hear you say primitive, and what's that part of the brain? I've heard you say three different things.
Yeah, survival.
Sure. Okay, survival, primitive, reptilian. So if you've ever heard any of those three references, that's the portion of the brain that Tamara's talking about, that these four things would belong in, right? Any of these areas. It's like the critical, defensive, contemptuous, and stonewalling. Those all belong in that primitive brain.
Yes.
Okay. Makes me think about that phrase or saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But here we have evidence that we can be hurt by those words, but it is our choice on connection, on how we respond. And in all of these, I think humility really is important and fundamental in order to be able to get out of that primitive brain, to see yourself as a person wanting to connect. You have to maintain that humility. So thank you for sharing all of those, because if we're wanting to connect, we have to be a good conduit of connection. And some of those four things really do get in the way.
Well, Tamara, you've given us some excellent ideas on the types of communications to avoid. I'm wondering if you can share with our sisters some ideas of what healthy connection would look like so that we can start getting our executive functioning brain thinking in those areas as we prepare for next week's episode with you, where we're going to talk a little bit more about boundaries and we can get into more of that. But can you leave us on a positive note on some things that we can do for healthy connection?
Sure. I've got a great list here. So one thing you can do is make sure that you're listening more than you're talking. And how are you supposed to be listening? Well, you can listen by practicing good eye contact, watch for nonverbal cues to see if someone's uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that you can see from nonverbal cues. You want to listen without judgment, and you don't want to make what they're saying about you. So you listen to what they're saying, and then you can be reflective. So, in your own words, repeat back what they said. And then you can also ask curiosity questions about what they've talked about or about them. It shows that you have interest in them, and that is very validating. When we're making connections, we're trying to validate other people, because that is just a way, that's the vehicle towards emotional connection, towards healthy connection. Other things to keep in mind is to keep your body posture open. So that would mean relaxed shoulders, no crossed arms. This is going to invite people to engage with you, and it communicates to other people that you're safe and that you're confident in yourself. If you have a closed body posture, it can communicate that you are a little insecure in some ways. If you keep it very closed, that actually can indicate shame. Another thing to do is to lean in while someone's speaking to you, not too uncomfortable, because, people want their space, but lean in to show that you're interested in what they're saying and that you want to hear it. Another thing to know and to do is to be comfortable with at least a little bit of silence. Not every moment of the conversation needs to be filled with words. Sometimes the most beautiful times in a conversation is silent. And that is when spirit speaks to spirit. And also another thing for healthy communication is to give them your undivided attention. Don't look at your phone if it goes off, because a lot of times we'll be having conversations with people and we don't know we're going to. And so then if your phone goes off, just ignore it. If it's possible, don't get distracted. Is essentially the thing, is make sure that you're giving someone your undivided attention. Another thing is, if you're going to be talking with them and you see something you genuinely like, be very genuine with compliments and be specific with praise. Otherwise, it can leave them feeling puzzled. They don't understand why, but be specific. And I would say these are things we can do with everybody. These are things we can do with people in our family. These are things that we can do when we go out shopping, if we're going to the post office, if we're talking to our child's teacher, if we're talking to coworkers. These are things that we can do with everybody. And that prepares you and builds that connection that all of us need to be healthy emotionally.
I love those. One thing you said just sparked a memory for me when you're talking about be specific with praise. And I realize as an adult how important that is in my kids' lives. But I think really we're all just big kids, because I remember teaching a youth class to teenage girls a few years back. And I said to one of the girls the next time I saw her, I said, by the way, you are so amazing. I really love the comments you made in Sunday's lesson. And she looked at me and she said, what comment did I make that you liked? And my eyes got really big and I thought for a second, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't remember. I just remember thinking you said some really wise things or you asked some really good questions. And she just looked so deflated. And I felt bad because I wish I could have been specific. I wish that I had specific praise to give her, because just to say generic, I really liked what you said, it did. It left her confused. Well, what did you like that I said? And I think that you could apply that to a lot of adults, because adults probably would wonder the same thing. Like, well, what was it that I said that you liked? And maybe that's their way of fishing for a compliment, but they could probably use it. And a lot of adults are just too proud to actually ask for specific praise. And I don't even need to say that it would be pride to keep you from asking that. I think that's also just a social faux pas to ask somebody what it is they like about you. Carly and I are probably thinking of the same movie right now we used to like when we were growing up. Carly, do you know what I'm talking about?
How Many Smiles Do I Have?
Yes.
Win a Date with Tad Hamilton.
Win a Date with Tad Hamilton. And there's two guys, they're fighting over a girl in a way. And one of the guys makes the mistake of telling the other guy, have you noticed that she has 9 different smiles? One for when she's feeling this way,
7.
One for when is it 7 different smiles?
7.
Okay, I trust you, Carly. Anyway, so one of the two guys tells the other man, she has 7 different smiles. Have you even realized that? And she has a smile for when she's feeling happy, when something genuinely makes her laugh. And he describes the 7 smiles for this woman. And then the man that he's told this to tells the girl, oh, I love your smiles. And you have 7 different smiles. And then he proceeds to tell what he's learned from this other man to the girl. And she says, well, which smile is it right now? Which smile is it? And then the guy's caught off guard because he's like, I don't know your smiles that well. I'm just reciting what the other guy told me. So I just think when it comes to specific praise, it just reminds me, well, which smile is it?
That's
so
funny.
Anyway, I love that you have given those pieces of advice on what to do. Those are wonderful.
Can I add this one about vulnerability?
Please.
Go for it, please.
Please.
The ability to be vulnerable with safe people can greatly affect your ability to connect with others, because vulnerability is truly sharing yourself so you can be felt, figuratively speaking, heard and seen. Essentially, it is an opportunity to be fully known by someone else. You must have the ability to discern if the person is safe to share with. Are you ready to be vulnerable?
I love it. I think that's a good trailer into next week's episode with boundaries, because if we want to know who to be vulnerable with, that is a very good, thought-provoking question. So that'll leave you, sisters, on the edge of your seats until Tamara comes back to us next week to talk about understanding boundaries, because as Tamara has actually talked to me about privately before, boundaries are something that a lot of people don't understand. And so we're going to really break down what they are, what healthy boundaries look like, and have a lot of fun talking about that. Now, sisters, as y'all know, we usually end our podcast, or in season 1, we ended our podcast with a call to action at the end of every episode. Carly and I have talked about, for at least for the next few episodes, we're going to let you pick your call to action from this episode, because I have a feeling there is something that stuck out to you that is something that you can either work on yourself based on what Tamara said, whether it's recognizing if you're being defensive or critical or contemptuous or stonewalling somebody else. Recognize when you do that. That would be a call to action. Just recognize it and realize, oh, I'm doing that right now. Or maybe it's something more simple, like not crossing your arms when you're talking to somebody else. You heard something in today's podcast that I'm sure spoke to you and that you could use as your own personal call to action, because Tamara gave about 1,000 calls to action you could apply today. And I love all of them. So that is your call to action this week, is to find the thing that was for you in today's episode and apply it this week.
So Tamara, thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom with us. Where can our sisters find you?
I can be reached at becomingshatterproof@gmail.com, or my website is becomingshatterproof.us, or I'm on Facebook at Becoming Shatterproof.
Awesome. Thank you.
We are so glad that you joined us today, Tamara. You are truly just so motivating and inspiring, and thank you for encouraging us all today. You've been a wonderful guest.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And we're excited to have you back for parts 2 and 3 over the next couple of weeks. So, sisters, as a reminder, we always include links to any resources that we've referenced in our episode in our show notes, along with a minute marker timeline and social information for Tamara, as well as our social media accounts for Hey Sister Podcast. We hope you have a great week, sisters. We look forward to chatting with y'all next week as we dive into part 2 of Tamara's advice, understanding and setting boundaries. Have a great week, sisters. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, go for it, Car.
Okay. Welcome to Hey Sister. This is season 2, episode 2.
We need to come up with the title. Are we calling this emotional check-in? Let's call it emotional self-check or emotional check-in. I meant to talk to you about that.
Emotional self-check. Sounds good.
All right, say that all again then. Episode 2.
Okay. Welcome to Hey Sister. This is season 2, episode 2. Emotional health check. What was it?
Emotional self-check.
Let me write it down. I'm sorry.
You can do it. You can do it.